Hi, I'm Nishka Patankar. I'm a junior in high school, and my mentor for this project was Kyler. So my project is about microplastics and the causes, effects, and solutions. And I chose this topic because microplastics are like a really big problem in society today, and they're only going to get worse from here. I'm pretty sure you've all heard at least a little bit about microplastics and how they're polluting the oceans, but their complete effects are often downplayed. For example, by 2050, um, there may be a greater mass of plastic in the oceans than fish, and also, or that there are over 51 trillion individual pieces of microplastics in oceans around the world, which is approximately 500 times greater than the number of stars in the Milky Way. But what are microplastics? Microplastics are plastic fragments measuring less than 5 millimeters in size, often separated from larger pieces of plastic, synthetic clothing, and personal and cleaning products. Over the course of the 21st century, microplastic pollution has skyrocketed to unforeseen levels, and scientists are unaware of the specific long-term impacts their release and consumption may have on human and environmental health. Microplastics can come from a lot of places, and one of them can be released into the environment due to improper management and disposal of plastic waste, especially during the recycling process. There are two main types of microplastics, primary microplastics, and which are original plastic particles directly from a source, and secondary microplastics, which are formed as a result of fragmentation and degradation of plastics in general. When larger plastic remnants are chemically and thermochemically heated for recycling, the altered microplastic particles are not separated from the organic compounds typically found in landfills. This combination creates pollution consisting of dangerous toxins, including dioxins, BPA, cadmium, and lead, which can exert negative impacts on the reproductive, developmental, and general health of humans and the environment. However, microplastics are not solely released through recycling, and most release actually comes from natural factors. Multiple biological and environmental variables, such as exposure to ultraviolet radiation, a steep change in temperature, or even the presence of bacteria, can significantly impact their release. And then this is just a visual I made of showing how like microplastics break down. So basically, it's the original plastic trash that you have, which breaks up into plastic fragments, which breaks up into microplastics, which have three separate categories. Large microplastics are between 1 and 5 millimeters, regular microplastics, and then nanoplastics are between 1 nanometer and 1 micrometer. And then they further break down into individual plastic molecules, meaning that they never actually completely decompose, which is why they're such a big problem. Um, and nanoplastics are more dangerous than normal microplastics because they're more likely to enter the bloodstream and therefore vital organs because they're so small. Nanoplastics are also small enough to enter singular cells and fetal placentas. In 2018, the quantities of nanoplastics in various brands of bottled water were tested in a study. According to the study conducted by researchers at the University of Columbia, three popular bottled water brands available in the United States were discovered to each contain between an alarming 110,000 and 370,000 plastic particles per liter. Of these particles, 90% were microplastics, with the remaining being larger microplastics. The study also conducted that although tap water contains nano and microplastics, bottled water typically has drastically higher concentrations of the compounds. In terms of timelines, the degradation process can take several decades to several centuries to complete, depending on the type of plastic. For example, in this visual, which is a table of like different types of plastic and how quickly they degrade with different processes. So microplastics don't just come from one type of plastic. There's several different types. These are just a few. Um, so these can come from like packaging, utensils, fruit cups, plastic bottles, um, and so plastic waste encountering UV radiation and sunlight typically decomposes at a more rapid rate compared to plastics discarded in landfills and bodies of water. However, the rate at which decomposition occurs due to UV radiation um, differs among plastics. Plastics capable of photodegradation and oxidation, such as PET, tend to degrade more quickly and easily than polyethylene-based plastics, such as HDPE and LDPE. Temperature also plays a significant factor. Plastics at higher temperatures tend to degrade more rapidly, leading to an increased frequency release of smaller plastic particles. In general, the smaller the diameter of a plastic particle is, the more difficult it is to manage and eliminate. And then this is the third visual I created, which is while the sheer quality of microplastics released into the oceans is concerning, the statistics for microplastic release on land may be even more drastic. Um, it is estimated that between 107,000 and 730,000 tons of microplastics are released onto American and European agricultural soils annually, in comparison to between 93,000 and 236,000 tons released into oceans annually. Sewage sludge and wastewater are commonly used as fertilizers despite their high levels of microplastics. While these materials are useful fertilizers due to their organic content, they are heavily contaminated with microplastics detached from microfibers in clothing, product packaging, and cleaning, hygiene, and beauty products. Another statistic is that microplastics have been discovered in sewage sludge since at least 1998, and a 2020 estimate states that sewage sludge alone deposits approximately 21,249 metric tons of microplastics onto American agricultural land each year. While microplastics are byproducts of sewage sludge and fertilizer, they're intentionally brought into the agricultural equation, as well as in the form of plastic mulching and plastic coverings for greenhouses. Clearly, an increase in agricultural microplastics will directly lead to greater levels of microplastics being consumed and ingested by humans. So, some environmental impacts are that microplastic particles can travel thousands of miles to different locations and into the atmosphere. Microplastics can alter the cloud structures, therefore enabling them to impact temperature, precipitation, and climate change. Clouds are typically constructed or formed when water molecules condense on particles in the atmosphere, such as sand and dust. These particles are known as seeds, which can be artificially or naturally created. Initially, scientists believed that microplastics could not be feasible cloud seeds due to their water repellent nature. However, new research suggests that microplastics can seed clouds quite well due to their higher than anticipated atmospheric concentrations and their ability to combine with and absorb other atmospheric compounds. Therefore, this, along with their ability to travel sizable distances, enables microplastics to deposit in remote, pristine, and relatively unexplored locations such as the Pyrenees Mountains, national parks, oceanic depths, and uninhabitable islands through precipitation. As the demand and availability of fossil fuels decreases, companies are increasing plastic production to account for and replace the lost material, essentially replacing fossil fuel products with plastic products. Chlorinated microplastics contain chemicals that seep into various aspects of the ecosystem, such as the soil and groundwater, and are therefore consumed by several organisms. Their presence in the environment impacts the full ecosystem, including soil-dwelling species, from earthworms to bacteria. While microplastics can serve as a food source for certain bacteria with helpful degradation enzymes, they also support disease-carrying viruses and bacteria. When placed in soil, these harmful microorganisms are consumed by other organisms such as earthworms, therefore propagating them through the food chain. Impacts on marine organisms. Chemical additives to plastics such as phthalates and BPA can impede the hormone distribution and receiving systems of both vertebrates and invertebrates. For example, microplastic exposure can activate peroxisome proliferation activated disruptors, or PPARs, which can cause disturbances to adipogenesis and the metabolization of lipids. Despite their nearly microscopic size, nanoplastics can wreak havoc in the body by passing through the semi-permeable membranes, such as through cells, as well as mostly non-permeable barriers, such as the blood-brain barrier and the placenta, which typical microplastics are unable to cross through. Inside cells, micro and nanoplastic particles can serve as catalysts for altered gene expression and biochemical reactions. According to the Leibniz Institute of Freshwater Ecology and inland fisheries, fish that have had nanoplastics traverse through their blood-brain barriers demonstrated significantly different behaviors than unaffected fish. For humans, microplastics can disrupt the digestive, respiratory, endocrine, reproductive, and immune systems, and cause several diseases. However, governments have begun to notice the different impacts of microplastics, and several countries have increased regulations But some solutions to microplastics are enzymes and nanocoils. Nanocoils are placed into water waste treatment facilities and used to absorb the they essentially break down the microplastics into smaller compounds such as carbon and their coils, and they can be reused multiple times. Um, and enzymes basically deconstruct the foundation of the microplastics and also break them down into smaller particles. Um, and in conclusion, pollution has skyrocketed to unforeseen levels for every decade since the 1950s, with each decade being several fold worse than its predecessor. And this pattern is predicted to continue, and if it does, um, by it's it rec it increased significantly since 1950, and, that's going back to my initial statistic that by 2050, there could be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Um, and with that, microplastic pollution can be reversible if we take alternatives such as sustainable practices and reducing plastic waste. Thank you. And these are my
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nishka. It sounds like, tap water might be better than bottled water in many cases. Do you have any questions that you would pose to the field to continue this investigation?
maybe like how much time do we have to reverse this? How much or like how long would it take to become completely like irreversible?
That's a very dark question, but yeah, it's a good question that we need to ask. Is there anything that you encourage people on this call to do in their lives to kind of reduce their plastic consumption?
Yeah, try and use like sustainable alternatives when you can, like recycle when you can, try and like instead of like using plastic bottles, use glass, metal, things that you can use for longer and they don't break down.
Awesome. And just one more question. What do you think was the hardest part of your research process?
For me, the hardest part was probably like trying to condense all this information into a 10-minute presentation and also like in my paper because like it's a lot of information and I wanted to know like what the most important things are to say and what it's like the most important things to say about this topic. Yeah.